Hello everyone, let us start the day with a prayer. In the name of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Amen. Dear God, this day, I thank you for all the love and the blessings you have given me, my loving family, my caring friends, and all the wonderful people I met in my life's journey. Please bless, protect, and guide them in overcoming their challenges. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Amen. Before we proceed with the discussion, let us have the online class rules. Okay. First is to be on time, be prepared, stay focused. Use the comment box for questions and comments. For your attendance, please comment present in the comment box. For the most essential learning competency, the learners must differentiate asexual from sexual reproduction in terms of the number of individuals involved and the similarities of offspring to parents. Excuse me. For the specific objectives, number one is to describe vegetative reproduction. Second is to describe the different types of sexual and asexual reproduction. Third is to use the Venn diagram to differentiate asexual from the sexual reproduction. Before we proceed with the actual lesson, let us have a review. You must identify whether the statement tells a fact or a bluff. Nucleus is also known as the powerhouse of the cell. I'll be giving you 3 seconds to answer. Okay, it's a bluff. Okay, mitochondria is known as the powerhouse of the cell, not nucleus, because nucleus is known as the control center of the cell. Next, plants and animals are examples of eukaryotic cells. 3 seconds to key in your answer. It's a fact. Plants and animals are examples of eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells are cells that has true nucleus. Next, cell wall gives the plant its rigidity and shape. You have 3 seconds to key in your answers. Okay, let us check your answers. Okay, it's a fact. Next, Robert Hooke is the first person to see a cell. 3 seconds to key in your answers. So, it's a fact. Okay? If you would remember, kung matatandaan ninyo, si Robert Hooke yung kumuha ng piece of cork or slice of cork and then he put it under the microscope. And then he saw small rooms. Okay? That's where the name cell came from because cell is the Latin word for small rooms. Okay. Next, Rudolf Bourgeois state that all cells came from pre-existing cells. 3 seconds to key in your answer. Fact. Okay. If you would remember, ito yung nakalagay sa ating cell theory. Okay, one of the statement there, yung pang third na statement. Okay, that all cells came from pre-existing cells. Next. Leeuwenhoek named the small organisms that he see in the microscope as micrographia. Okay, 3 seconds to key in your answer. Of course, it's a bluff. Okay, although Leeuwenhoek give the small organism names, he didn't name it as micrographia, but instead he named, named it as animalcules. Next, the word cell came from the Latin word cell meaning small rooms. Okay, you have 3 seconds to answer. So do you sometimes ponder where do babies come from? To answer that, let us have the lesson asexual and sexual reproduction. So what is reproduction? Reproduction is the process of formation of new individuals of its own kind. It is the creation of a new individual from pre-existing cells. Reproduction is one of the 7 life processes. And remember that all living things reproduce. Why is reproduction important? Reproduction is important for the continuation of the race. or other call it for survival. Next, what are its different types? Okay, actually, we have two types of reproduction, the asexual reproduction and the sexual reproduction. Okay. In order to be considered alive, organisms must be able to reproduce. Remember that reproduction is the ability to produce offspring that are similar to the parents. Offspring is the term for the product of reproduction. It is sometimes called as child or baby. Actually, there are two possible ways that an organism can reproduce. It can be through asexual reproduction or through sexual reproduction. So what are the two types of reproduction? I mentioned it earlier that we have two types, the asexual reproduction and the sexual reproduction. For the asexual reproduction, remember that it involves only one parent. And because it involves only one parent, it involves no gametes or sex cells. Remember that offspring are genetically the same as the parents. For the sexual reproduction, usually involves two parents and involves gametes or what we call as sex cells. It also involves fertilization. Okay? What do you mean by fertilization? Fertilization is the union of egg cell, and sperm cell. Next, offspring are genetically different from each of the parents because um, the zygote or the fertilized egg would receive 50% of the genetic material coming from the mother and 50% genetic material coming from the father. Okay. Let us talk about sexual reproduction. Remember that for sexual reproduction, it involves two parents. Okay? And offspring share characteristic of each parent. And also remember that sexual reproduction promotes increases genetic variability among offspring. Okay? For example, for this example, this son, okay, this is a son for these two people. Okay? As you would notice here, okay, the son got the color of his eyes from his father as well as the shape of his ears, while he got the height of his mother and the color of her mother's hair. Okay? So, ayan yung sinasabi, ayan yung best example for the statement number 2, that offspring share the characteristic of each parent. Okay? Examples for sexual reproduction, we have plants, mammals, fish, reptiles, etc. Okay? Still for sexual reproduction, okay, remember that fertilization is the union of gametes and it involves sex cells. Okay? Sperm cell for the male gamete or male sex cell and egg cell for the female sex cell. Okay? Remember that zygote is the term used for the fertilized egg. And a zygote has 23 chromosomes coming from the sperm cell or from the father and 23 chromosomes coming from the mother or from the egg cell. Okay? As I mentioned earlier, fertilization is the fusing or the union of an egg and a sperm cell, wherein 23 chromosomes will be coming from the mother and 23 chromosomes will be coming from the father. There are actually two types of fertilization, external fertilization and internal fertilization. Let us talk about internal fertilization. Remember that internal fertilization produces smaller number of offspring. Okay? And from the word internal, the egg is fertilized by the sperm inside the female reproductive organ. Examples are the mammals, okay, the birds, the reptiles. For this example, okay, as you can see, the baby or the fetus is growing inside the mother's womb or uterus. Okay. By the way, for those who does not know, okay, humans are classified as mammals. Next, external fertilization. Okay. From the term external fertilization, okay, fertilization happens outside the female's body. Okay? Eggs are laid in an environment or in a wet environment and fertilized outside the female body. For this kind of fertilization, there is a production of large number of offspring. Okay? Remember that the egg is fertilized by sperm outside the female's body, and the female lays the egg and then the male fertilizes them. Example of these are the fishes and some amphibians. So for this example, we have fishes. Okay? So female fish lays egg and then male awaits to spread sperm over the eggs. Okay? This also for the frog. Okay? The female frog will lay eggs and the male frog waits to spread sperm over the eggs. Example, let us now proceed with asexual reproduction. Okay? For asexual reproduction, it involves only one parent. And since it involves only one parent, there is no sex cells or gametes needed. The offspring are produced by cell division or what we call as mitosis. And the offspring are identical to the parent or they have the same DNA. There are five main ways of asexual reproduction: binary fission, budding, fragmentation, regeneration, and parthenogenesis. Let us talk about binary fission. In binary fission, cell divides into two identical daughter cells. Okay? Or the parent cell divides into two identical daughter cells. Example of these are the euglena, the amoeba, the paramecium, and the bacteria. For this example, we have the euglena, wherein the parent euglena after some time develop new flagellum. Okay? And then after some time also, okay, it is um, separated into two identical daughter cells. Okay? In a paramecium, um, it happens to be longitudinal separation. Okay? Or na-separate sila longitudinally. Next, for the binary fission in amoeba. Okay? So, for the parent amoeba, it is experiences elongation before the daughter cells are produced. Okay, nagkakaroon ng elongation and then nagkakaroon ng division ng nucleus and cytoplasm. And after some time, nagkakaroon ng two daughter cells that are, uulitin natin, identical, okay? Identical when it comes to their DNA. Next example would be the paramecium. Okay, so for the parent cell, so almost same lang din sa ating amoeba, nagkakaroon ng ayan, elongation, and then nagkakaroon ng separation. So, yung reproduction with bacteria, same lang din almost dito kay, kay amoeba, and kay protozoa. I mean paramecium. Okay? Next would be budding. Okay, budding, in budding, an offspring grows out of the body of the parent. Okay, or a bud is produced. Okay, for example, in the cases of yeast and hydra. Okay. So, for example, the parent yeast, okay, develop buds, okay, until the bud is fully grown, and then the bud produces genes of buds. Okay. Next, for the case of hydra, ganun din. Okay. Si parent hydra nagde-develop ng bud. Okay. So, after some time, nagkaroon ng fully developed bud, and it would separate from the parent hydra uh, to form into a new organism. Okay, so separate organism na siya dito. Next would be fragmentation. Okay? Um, in fragmentation, the body of the parent breaks into pieces of which can produce an offspring. Example for the cases of starfish, flatworms, and hydra. Okay. Ma'am, bakit nandiyan na naman po si Hydra? A while ago, na-mention nyo na po si Hydra sa budding. Actually, Hydra can reproduce through budding and fragmentation. Okay. So, for example, sa case ni starfish, okay, na-amputate or na-slice yung isa sa kanyang mga galamay, okay, or tentacles na matatawag. Okay. It would produce a new starfish. Okay. And then, with Hydra, for example, na-slice siya into two, okay, it would produce another Hydra. Okay? And then, for the case ng flatworms, okay, for example, na-slice yung body ng parent flatworm or planaria into three, okay, it would produce three new flatworms or planaria. Okay? By the way, flatworms are also known as planaria. Regeneration, okay? So when we say regeneration, okay, it happens when part of a parent's body is detached, okay, and can regrow into a new one. So for example, leopard gecko, okay? So the tail of the gecko or the leopard gecko lost its tail. It will regrow for after 22 weeks. Okay, remember that regeneration is the ability to replace or regrow missing body parts. Okay, ano bang difference between fragmentation and regeneration? Okay, so most of the students um, misunderstood these two. Okay, so akala nila parehas lang to. Okay, so when we say fragmentation, the organisms are fragmented, resulting in each fragment growing into an individual organism. Okay, so for example, hinati-hati mo yung hydra. Okay, hinati mo yung hydra sa apat. Okay, it would grow into um, four new individual. Okay, and then yung regeneration. Okay, regeneration occurs when an organism wants to regrow a lost limb or other parts of the body. Okay? Just like for example, sa case ng lizard, okay, yung kanilang tail. Okay? So, pag fragmentation, nagkakaroon ng new individual organism. Kapag regeneration, okay, part of the body yung nare-reproduce or nagre-regrow. Okay? Next, parthenogenesis. Okay? Parthenogenesis. Okay? Actually, parthenogenesis is a Greek word meaning virgin birth. Okay? Parthenogenesis is a form of reproduction which an egg can develop into an embryo without being fertilized by sperm. Okay? Example of um, organism that undergoes or are parthenogenetic are the reptiles, okay, some reptiles, apids, okay, bees and ants, okay, or yung mga insects. Next, let us now proceed with vegetative propagation, okay. It is the production of new plant from a portion of another plant, such as stem or branch. It is also called as vegetative reproduction, okay? Or simply the growing of new plant without seed. Example of vegetative propagation includes cutting, grafting, layering, and budding. Okay? Actually, there are two types of vegetative propagation or the reproduction not involving seeds. Okay? For the natural ones, okay, mga tubers, runners, yan. For the artificial, commonly used by gardeners to propagate plants. Example, cuttings, layering, grafting, and budding. Okay? Okay. Example of a natural vegetative propagation. For example, the stem tubers. Okay. So, all in underground stem or tip or buds, eyes, produce new shoots. Example for the cases ng potatoes. Okay. For the runners, okay, horizontal running over the soil surface. Terminal bud of the runner sends up new shoots. Example, strawberry and creeping buttercup. Okay. For the artificial vegetative propagation, we have cutting. Okay. Slip removed from plant and rooted in water or well-watered compost. Okay. So, ginugupit and then binababad sa water or well-watered compost. And then, ita-transfer sa another pot kapag nagkaroon na ng roots. Next, grafting. Grafting is a method of plant propagation where the scion, in example, the plant to be propagated, is attached to the stock. In example, the plant onto which it is grafted. Okay, example sa apple trees. Okay. So, ginagamit to karaniwan, for example, yung kung gusto mo na mamunga agad yung mga young trees or young plants. Okay, sa cases ng mga apples. Okay, or sa mga mangoes. Okay? Or any fruit bearing trees. Okay? Example din ng pinagagamitan ng grafting is yung mga halimbawa, yung combination ng different species like for example, guapol. Okay? Pinagsabang guava and apple. And yung ating tinatawag na apple mango, which is the combination of apple and mango. Okay? So, ang ginagawa dito, gumagawa ng slice, okay, in the stock, and then, um, make a cut into the scion, or yung plant to be propagated, okay, and then, ikakat yun, and then, idudugtong yun sa tinatawag natin na stock, and then, ibabind yun ng tape, or yung iba tela yung ginagamit, okay. Next, layering. Layering is a method of artificial vegetative propagation where a branch of plant is bent over and pinned to the earth at a node. Okay? So, yung ibang ginagawa dito, naglalagay ng parang mga soil and then, um, nilalagyan ng tali. Okay? So, when roots develop, the branch is separated from the parent plant. So, kinakat na nila yun kapag nagkaroon ng roots yung branch. Okay? And then, karaniwan itong ginagawa for the propagation of woody plants like blackberry and gooseberry. Okay? Next one would be budding. Budding is a method of plant propagation where a bud, okay, example of a rose, is attached to the stalk of a briar. Example, roses. Okay? Okay, let us have the different examples of asexual reproduction. Okay, we have, for binary fission, we have bacteria. Okay. For fragmentation, we have flatworms. Okay. Vegetative propagation, we have strawberries. Yeah. Budding, we have hydra. For parthenogenesis, we have whiptail lizard. Let us now differentiate sexual reproduction with asexual reproduction. Okay. In terms of cell division, okay, for sexual reproduction, for the processes, it undergoes cell division and other processes. Okay? So, bukod sa cell division, fertilization din nangyayari sa sexual reproduction. While for asexual reproduction, nagkakaroon lang ng cell division kahit walang fertilization. Okay? For sexual reproduction, kailangan ng two parents. Okay? And for asexual, one parent is needed. Okay? Or one parent is enough. For the rate of production for sexual reproduction is slower than the rate for asexual. Okay, so mas mabilis yung reproduction ng asexual reproduction. Okay, compare with the sexual. Kaya nga 'di ba mas maraming bacteria kaysa sa tao. Next, offspring have genetic information from two parents. Okay? Sa case ng sexual reproduction, okay, sabi ko nga 'di ba 50% coming from the mother, 50% coming from the father. Okay, and then for the asexual reproduction, offspring is identical to the parent. Okay, genetically identical. Okay. Okay, let us now make a Venn diagram, okay, about asexual and sexual reproduction. Okay, both are types of reproduction in living organisms, and both pass DNA from parent to offspring. Okay. For the asexual reproduction, it produces more offspring. Okay. Only one parent, okay, is needed. Okay. Simpler. Okay. Produces exact copy of parent, no variation, and preserves genetic continuity. For the sexual reproduction, okay, slower production of offspring, need to find a mate. Okay, so you cannot reproduce if you don't have a mate. Okay, more complex, mix of parents. Okay, allows for high amounts of variation or diversity. Okay, and better at adapting to environment. Okay, let us now have the mini quiz. Okay, label each as sexual, asexual, or both. Okay, an organism produces offspring without fertilization. Okay, asexual. Okay, the offspring is identical to the parent. Asexual. Next, bacteria reproduce this way. Asexual, specifically through binary fission. Okay, 4. Produces a large number of offspring, improves its chances of survival. Okay. asexual. Okay. Doesn't need to find a mate. Okay. Asexual. Corals reproduce this way. Both. Okay. By the way, corals can produce sexually and asexually. And growing new plant without seed. Okay. To sum it up, okay, for sexual reproduction, it involves internal fertilization and external fertilization. Advantages includes offspring less likely to have mutation, okay? And then successful traits can be selected and failed traits can be prevented from passing on. Disadvantages, require mate before reproduction or require mate to reproduce, okay? Population increase are limited. So, hindi sila ganun kabilis magpadami. Okay? For asexual reproduction, we have budding, regeneration, fission, parthenogenesis, vegetative reproduction. Okay? For the advantages of asexual reproduction, uniformity in offspring. So, magkakamukha. Okay? Kung ano yung itsura ng parent cell, yun din yung itsura ng daughter cell. Okay? Can increase populations rapidly. Okay? And then, does not require mate for reproduction to take place. Ang disadvantages, lack of diversity in offspring kasi nga 'di ba, they are identical dun sa kanilang parent. Okay? Because they reproduce offspring genetically identical to parents, the offspring inherit any mutations from the parent. Okay? So, yung chance na makuha niya kung ano yung merong mutated gene doon sa parent. So, chances is meron din doon sa daughter cells. Okay. For your activity, please answer pages 24 to 27 of the month for 5-6 module. Thank you and have a nice day.